Chapter 6. The First of the New. Yavin, 9ABY. Han Solo leaned against the stone railing overlooking the sprawling jungle below, his discomfort wrestling with his impatience. He had never been one for his wife's and brother-in-law's mystical exploits, as most of his life had been spent in deep skepticism about anything other than the tangible facts in front of his nose. Unwillingly, reluctantly, sometimes even kicking and screaming, he had come to recognize the mystical garbage as a fact, intangible though it was. But even as he had watched Luke flipping through the air, taking down a crime cartel before destroying the two most powerful men in the galaxy, he thought to himself, "Weird scene for a street rat from Corellia, don't you think?" "Uncle Luke!" cried a small, high voice. Han turned away from the steaming Yavin jungles to watch Ben bounding toward his uncle. Luke grinned broadly and threw his arms wide to embrace the boy. Ben launched himself forward at breakneck speed, cackling gleefully as Luke raised his arms. Ben floated in mid-air, spinning in somersaults as Luke used the Force to amuse his nephew. Han looked to the edge of the circular veranda and saw Qi'ra, older than Ben, but still slightly smaller, peeking out tentatively. Ben settled to the ground as Luke waved toward Qi'ra. Slowly the girl's hesitancy melted, and a radiant smile settled on her face as she too ran the length of the veranda and threw herself into Luke's arms. With both children laughing at their uncle's magical tricks, they darted off in high spirits, Qi'ra chasing Ben. Luke smiled as he watched them, before turning toward Han. Luke's smile widened as he rose to his feet, and he strode across the veranda to greet his friend. Despite all the mystical mumbo-jumbo that had dominated his friend's life, Han could not help but smile. It was hard to believe this was the same naive, snotty kid he picked up at Mos Eisley, and Han smirked with some private satisfaction that no amount of Jedi tranquility would make Han forget saying to Luke, "Watch your mouth, kid, or you're going to find yourself floating home." Luke reached Han, who threw his arms open to embrace his friend. As they embraced, Chewbacca walked into the veranda, Ben and Qi'ra clinging to his arms as Chewie carried them along, laughing a percussive Wookiee laugh. "How you doing, Chewie?" Luke called, as Chewbacca roared a greeting. Chewie settled the children back down to the ground, and he turned to the doorway. There, framed in the doorway, stood a cloaked and hooded figure, smaller than Luke, and radiating a confident tranquility. She was accompanied by a second figure, cloaked in white. Both women glided forward, dignity and confidence suffusing their gaits. The two children paused their play, and the boy's face lit up in excitement, while Qi'ra's face was wide with wonder. As the women reached the center of the veranda, Leia removed her hood, and Luke smiled at the sight of his sister. Luke turned away from Han, walking toward Leia. Luke bowed his head, saying, "Greetings, Padawan Leia Organa Solo. Are you prepared to conclude your trials?" Leia smiled wryly, amused at Luke's formality. She did not chide him for it, as she knew this moment represented the culmination of years of training and preparation. Luke had expressed confidence that this was a mere formality, and knowing that she had been ready for some time, her smile settled into seriousness as she affirmed, "Yes. Yesterday you faced your dark side in exemplary fashion. You've demonstrated your knowledge, your skill, your attunement with the Force. Only one test remains." Luke did not finish his proclamation, as a male voice, strangely reverberated, said, "This ought to be good." Luke and Leia both turned to watch two figures coalesce at the edge of the veranda. The forms of Anakin Skywalker and Obi-Wan Kenobi materialized, both beaming excitement and pride. Anakin grinned mischievously, saying, "You didn't think I was going to miss my daughter's trial, did you?" Leia rolled her eyes, but Luke could sense she was touched. As her mock annoyance subsided, she beamed at Obi-Wan, saying, "Ben, it's so good to see you." "The pleasure is mine, Princess," Obi-Wan said, bowing graciously. Leia turned and saw Ben and Qi'ra shrinking back in alarm, their eyes wide with apprehension and wonder. She realized that neither children had met a Force ghost before, and she reassured them, saying, "It's okay, children. Ben, this is your grandfather, Anakin, and this is Obi-Wan, whom I also call Ben. You were named after him." Ben did not answer, as he was still dumbstruck at the appearance of the two ghosts. As Ben's curiosity supplanted his fear, Leia heard her brother say, "Shall we begin?" Leia nodded, removing her robe as Luke removed his. Luke assumed his position on the opposite side of the veranda, and Leia could sense his seriousness in holding the final test of her Jedi trials. Contrasting against Luke's seriousness, Leia heard Anakin say, 50 credits on Luke. Oh, I'll take that and raise you double on Leia, Obi-Wan retorted. I thought Jedi ghosts didn't deal with credits, Leia said, smiling, and as Anakin chuckled, Leia ignited her lightsaber. Its purple blade cast a glow on the polished floor of the veranda, and Leia's smile broadened as she sensed Ben's and Kira's wonder and excitement. Across the veranda, Luke ignited his own saber, its green blade reflecting off the surface. Luke could not entirely mute his smile as, out of the corner of his eye, he saw his nephew rise to his feet, balling his fists in excitement. Han settled himself to the ground beside his son, ready to hold him back in case he became too excited. Luke's serious intent at testing his sister supplanted his smile, and he nodded to communicate that the trial had begun. Leia walked forward slowly, but confidently across the veranda, and Luke strode forward to meet her. Leia paused, and Luke waited, ready for her attack. Leia twirled her lightsaber and settled into her offensive posture, but Luke had a sense of something amiss. Scanning his sister's face, he saw concern and fear blossom, and he felt the emotion of dread flooding her senses. He lowered his blade, his own concern dawning. As he opened his mouth to ask her what was troubling her, he felt his lightsaber shoot from his hand and arc across the center of the veranda into Leia's hand. The feeling of dread vanished instantly, replaced by an amused triumph. Obi-Wan's howl of laughter echoed across the veranda, and Anakin and Ahsoka joined in afterward. Luke looked to Obi-Wan, his embarrassment struggling against the virality of his former master's amusement. Obi-Wan looked to Anakin and, still laughing, said, "The Wumprat doesn't spawn far from the nest, does it, Anakin?" "Sister, that's not how this works," Luke said, amused in spite of his embarrassment. "Well, if you want me to beat you in front of our father, we can go again," Leia said, and then smiling added, "But we both know that not all confrontations require. Father, what was it that Mother used to say?" "Aggressive negotiations," Anakin said, chuckling. Leia raised her eyebrows mischievously, and Luke, bowing, replied, "Congratulations then, Leia Organa, Jedi Knight?" After the trial, "Master Luke, sir." "How good to see you," called a familiar, prissy, metallic voice. Luke turned away from the view of the sun setting over Yavin to see 3PO shuffling forward, holding a tray carrying a glass of bantha milk. Leia strolled alongside him, cradling a steaming mug of tea in her hands. "3PO," Luke said, smiling warmly at the droid. A sequence of beeps erupted from the shadows of the balcony, and 3PO turned, nearly spilling the milk he carried on a platter for his former master. Luke reached out to steady the beverage, and it lifted off the tray, floating through the air toward Luke's outstretched hand. "R2-D2, you nearly made me drop Master Luke's libations," 3PO cried. R2's squawk sounded suspiciously like laughter, and 3PO affected comic outrage as he replied, "No, I do not want you to show me how to bartend." R2 snorted and rolled away back into the temple, and as Leia settled beside Luke at the balcony's railing to watch the sunset, they both smiled as the two droids drifted off, nagging and cajoling each other. "We've got to get those two together more often," Luke said, sipping the frothy, ice-cold blue liquid. He closed his eyes in pleasure, remembering dinners with his aunt and uncle. Appreciating the rich flavor, he said, "I can't believe Han brought bantha milk for me." Han went on and on about how hard it is to find a bantha on Coruscant. Leia smiled. Then, sipping her tea, she closed her eyes in pleasure, saying, "But nothing beats Luvela tea and Yavin honey." Luke smiled, putting his arm around her shoulder and squeezing her gently. They sipped their drinks together, Luke leaning against the railing as he looked out across the jungle. In the distance, he picked out the old rebel base, dark and empty on the horizon. "You know, Han and the kids wouldn't mind seeing us around more often either. Have you thought any more about my idea of moving the Order back to Coruscant?" Leia asked. "Where would you get your Luvela tea, then?" Luke chided. "It's a fair trade if we get to be together more often," Leia said, her light tone becoming more serious to communicate her desire to be near her family. "I agree," Luke said. "But even if the Order came back there, I'd still be gone most of the time. Plus, it won't be long before we admit Ben and Kira. And there's still the matter of your Jedi duties to discuss. Have you found more Jedi? Leia asked, wondering what her Jedi duties might entail. We found 3 more potential Padawans last week, and that's after the 5 in the last month. Things are about to become very busy, Luke said. Which reminds me, now that you're a Jedi, you want me to take on a Padawan? Leia asked, her smile faltering slightly. Too many Padawans, not enough masters, Luke grinned. When you're ready. Of course. Leia frowned. Mon Mothma had already reached out, asking for her help with challenges arising in the election. She had barely seen Han or the children in 3 months, and with Ahsoka leaving, she had more questions than answers on the matter of training a Padawan. Uncertain about committing to anything just yet, Leia opted for a subject change. How is it going with Master Rancisis and Master Kaj? Luke frowned, and some of the unease that had preoccupied him over the past few weeks emerged. After sipping again from his milk, he replied, not as smoothly as when Ahsoka, Cal, and Tyler returned. You heard them. They fight every change we try to make. You always suspected some of the older Jedi would struggle with the changes, Leia said soothingly. Yes, but without being able to explain everything with our father, they aren't very open to my perspective, Luke indicated. Are you having second thoughts? Leia asked, her frown returning. No, Luke said. It was hard enough explaining it to Ahsoka. Taylor might be understanding. Cal, who knows? But these two won't be. The Order might crumble before it's even fully formed. Leia nodded, reassured but still concerned. The two stood in comfortable silence as the sunset faded. Minutes later, Leia broke the silence, saying, Perhaps they should meet Kira. Curious, Luke asked. How's it going with her? Remarkable, Leia said, smiling proudly. She's a wonder. Luke smiled, his heart lightening. Tell me more. Well, she's still very shy, but I have a feeling she's always going to be that way. She and Ben are inseparable, and her outbursts and night terrors have essentially stopped. She's finally started talking, and at least when it's just me and Ben, she won't stop, she said, her pride radiant. You've done an incredible job, Luke said admiringly. I haven't been alone, Leia admitted. Between Winter, the nannies, and the specialists, I've got a lot of support, and she absolutely adores Chewbacca. Luke chuckled appreciatively. Chewbacca was as patient and nurturing with children as he was ferocious toward his enemies. And Han? Luke asked. Leia's face darkened slightly, and Luke had a sense of her unease. She replied, He likes her well enough, but he's not around a lot. He's been back and forth to Kashyyyk, cataloguing the damage the Empire inflicted. Luke turned to her, studying her concern. She set the unease aside, and her smile returned as she said, Master Rancisis and Master Kaj should also talk to the specialists. The old code's conception of attachment makes sense in some contexts, but those contexts are long past. It does not account for what the new Jedi will face. I agree, Luke said, sipping his milk as he watched the dusk deepen. Take Kira. By all accounts, she should be a dark shadow of her father, yet she seeks connection at every opportunity. In the few moments when I've had a window into her relationship with her mother, I've had the impression that it was her mother's love that held her back from evil. She seeks connection with me, with Ben, with Chewie, even with 3PO. And when she finds it, it's difficult to see the darkness, Leia explained. That doesn't mean it isn't there, Luke countered. He was grateful to hear that Kira had begun to overcome the strange, violent outbursts, but he knew that few Jedi overcame their dark side permanently. Of course it's still there, Leia agreed patiently before adding, but the darkness becomes more apparent whenever she perceives that her attachments aren't secure. As those attachments become more tangible, more predictable, and more secure, her light shines brighter. I have broached that with Master Rancisis, Luke said. He countered that the Brotherhood of the Jedi is sufficient, and he disagrees with the prospect of training Kira. She'll definitely need a strong hand, Leia admitted. Ahsoka, perhaps? Luke asked. Leia's face darkened. Ahsoka's leaving. What? Luke asked, surprised. Leia smiled sadly, saying, I can't blame her. After everything she's seen and done, she deserves a quiet life, And she's not a Jedi. We always knew this day might come. Perhaps, Luke admitted, grudgingly. He had been counting on Ahsoka's guidance as the Order grew, and without her guidance, he felt as if there was one less pillar supporting the endeavor. Leia sipped her tea and counted the stars emerging as night fell. Regardless of who trains her, you can't expect somebody to relinquish attachment if they aren't already secure in their attachments. What do you mean by that? Luke asked, uncertain of how to reconcile the paradox. Paradox? She echoed, reading his confused thought, before saying, yes, that's the word for it. The Jedi Code is not open to paradox, yet paradox is everywhere we look. Look at our father. He lost his mother, and he never felt secure. He feared to lose our mother, and still, security eluded him. Without security, there was no way he could even begin to let go of his fear. But the Jedi Code, Luke objected. Leia interrupted him, now more concrete, saying, the Jedi Code is ancient, and nobody knows who wrote it. Meanwhile, the researchers on Chandrila are demonstrating as we speak how narrow the code is. A narrow code creates a narrow path, and with all the trauma of the last 50 years, do you really think every foundling is going to be prepared to walk such a path? Luke drained the last of his milk and settled into a reflective silence. The sun's light was gone, although a sliver of purple remained along the horizon, muted by the warm red glow of Yavin above. No, I don't reckon they will, Luke admitted. I encourage you to read what the researchers have learned. Add it to the Jedi Code. Take the best of both, Leia counseled. Master Rancisis is not going to like this, Luke said. He doesn't have to, Leia said encouragingly. He's one master among what will eventually be many. Yoda told you to pass on what you have learned. I encourage you not to stop learning. Luke turned to her, smiling proudly. She had come so far in such a short period of time. In many ways, she had exceeded him, and he wondered at whether Yoda and Ben should have chosen her to face Vader. Then again, as she deftly navigated her training, her obligations to diplomacy, her obligations of parenthood, and her obligations toward the Alderaanian diaspora, he knew that they were both where they belonged. And with her insight to lean on, which had proven every bit as valuable as that of Yoda, Obi-Wan, Anakin, Ahsoka, and Qui-Gon, he felt reassured that the future of the Jedi was bright indeed.